Selma Bernstein Sadofsky. I was born in Omaha. And when they asked me where or what hospital, I say the Nicholas Sen. That's not even in existence anymore. And I didn't go to school here very long. It was Beale School. But our family left for Columbus, Nebraska. And we were there a few years. It was a little bit anti-Semitic, and I think that made it difficult for my father. We went on to Grand Island, Nebraska, and I lived there for a fair amount of years. I was there till I was, I think, almost 15. But my father was very honest. He had a grocery store, and it was not a mom and pop store. He had 6 butchers on Saturdays, and he took me with him on occasion for various things. And so I went with him one time. I was just a little tight then. Went with him when he was bidding on cattle. So he actually was able to get what he wanted for the store. He could get it on the hoof. When I say he was very honest, I was in the grocery store. As I say, it was a large grocery store for that time. I was in the store, and a man came in to sell him ice cream bars. He had a freezer. Dad had a freezer up in front, and I could overhear the conversation. And the man said, "Now you sell these for, like you have four to a pint, and that's the way they go." But he said, "It's really, we cut them so you only have 3 to the pint." I think that guy should be very happy that my dad didn't turn out of the store. He said, if I sell anything that's 4 to the pint, it's 4 to the pint. It's not something less than that. And he had a large store, had several butchers on the weekends. And when the war came in, we had to have so many coupons for sugar and various things like that. I helped out a little bit in the back of the store, and my dad had the weight of a pound, and he said, "Now you have to be careful that it is exactly a pound," so that we had the balance scales to work on. And so we would open a 5-pound bag of sugar, and we'd have 5 1-pound bags to sell because nobody had enough coupons to buy 5 pounds or 10 pounds at a time. So I know that one thing he taught me was you have to be honest. What you say you're selling, that's exactly what you're selling. Well, we lived in Grand Island, and my mother became very ill while we were there. And they didn't know much about cancer at that time, but my mother had cancer, and she was in a hospital here in Omaha. But after a while, she didn't want to stay in that hospital very long, and she wanted to come home. And so Dad got a nurse to stay with her, and she was at home. She tried to come to the table when I was 14, 15. And he had pillows all around her so she could sit at the table. But she couldn't stay. She wasn't well enough. So they took her back to bed. And so, of course, she couldn't be at the table for my 15th birthday. I think that's what it was. And she passed away at home. My mother's mother lived with us, my grandmother, and she did a lot of the cooking. She made strudel like you've never tasted unless you tasted hers. but she wasn't a fancy cook. She'd make bread every Friday, and the bread, the smell in the house when we came home from school was wonderful. The bread would still be warm. It would melt the real butter. It would melt the butter, and we would just sit down, and I think the small loaves we probably ate from one end to the other until they were all gone. But when Mother passed away, my grandmother also left, and that was pretty hard on my father. He had 3 children, and what was he going to do? And he thought maybe he could get someone to come and stay with us, but that didn't work out. So he had us come to Omaha and stay with his sister here, my Aunt Sarah and Uncle Bill. And so I lived with them until I was married. But Aunt Sarah was very nice. It was not a Cinderella story or anything like that. But she also was the same as most women that age, where she went to school till, I don't know, maybe 6th grade or 8th grade. And then they were taught to cook and keep house. And she couldn't understand some of the things that I would come home with. But anyway, Dad wanted us to be in Omaha where there was more of a Jewish population. And so that's when we came to live with my aunt. My sister was married about a year after we came to Omaha. And so there were then 2 of us. And Aunt Sarah, of course, had no idea what to do with the girl because she had 3 sons and my brother. And what was I doing there? I honestly think she was a little afraid of me. So if I would, there's one bathroom in that older house. If I would go up to the bathroom and maybe one of her sons was upstairs, she would call one of us to come back down. So I think she was a little afraid of me. And there was no reason to be, although I was close to my cousins. And I still have one cousin alive, and he lives in California. And on occasion, we talk to each other. I try to remember to call him on his birthday. And we were only 6 months apart, so it was kind of easy to do some of the same things. Well, I went to Nebraska. I started out at Creighton University for my freshman year of college, and then finished up in Nebraska, and came back to Omaha and went to work. My first job, I think, was in a clothing store, and of course I tried to know where certain sizes were and things like that, and the ladies were. And one lady that came in was deaf, and at that time I didn't know anything about it other than she couldn't hear me, and I would say something and I didn't understand what she was trying to say, so it was necessary to get out pencil and paper, so I got the right thing that she was after. I think it was a skirt, but I don't remember now. But anyway, I also, after that, I worked in an office, and that actually was a little easier on me. We had to open envelopes and sort mail and answer the telephone and things like that. Not exactly a taxing type of work, but that's what I did at one time. And when I became engaged, I, of course, had to do some shopping. And she was with me when I bought my wedding dress. and she didn't have a lot to say, so I knew what I wanted, and that was mine, that I could do as I wanted. And being rather tall, long arms, what they had to do with the wedding dress was lengthen the sleeves. It was a lace dress, and they put an additional lace ruffle at my wrist to have that long enough for me. And, well, let's see. As I said, when I got married, I still worked. I worked at the telephone company at that time because it wasn't like now. They talked to people when they called, and so I had the phone company I worked at, and I worked until, well, when I got pregnant, I was very sick to my stomach. It was hard to remain at my desk, and eventually then I had to stop working, and when our oldest son was born, thank God, my children are all still alive and well, and we had 4 boys and 1 girl. And when we got down to about the 3rd boy, I thought, well, that's enough. Okay, so 1 more comes along. And that definitely wasn't enough. So, but I don't know what I'd do without that girl now. She helps me a great deal with my accounts and things I don't see quite as well as I once did. And she still does it, but she has her hands full too, with a husband and a house and grandson, and expecting another child, a granddaughter. It will be my great granddaughter. My boys were named Jerry, Sheldon, Alan, Paul. My daughter is Eileen, and she lives in Council Bluffs. The others live in the Omaha area. Like La Vista and Pavilion and places that are close. And they're very good. And they come to visit so that I see them all the time. And we have a chance to talk and enjoy each other. One of my sons had a problem with his eyesight, and he still sees out of one eye and not both eyes. He had surgery. In fact, he had surgery twice, but apparently they can't do anything more about it. And the others basically are well and have gotten along fine. In fact, that son with one eye, he still does very well, and he doesn't complain. He's really very nice about that. I gave all the baby things away. That was right before my youngest son was born. I thought we were finished, but I don't know what in the world I'd do without him. If I need something, they seem to be able to locate it. I'll need little things, shampoo, sort of things like that. They'll see that I have it. And one of my granddaughters, one of my daughter-in-laws, just loves to shop. I hate to shop, but if I need anything that she could shop for, she would be delighted to do it. And so she's helped me out too. Well, after I was married and had children, the neighbors were kind of the same way. And we managed to have some activities that we did together. And I did some telephoning not always with an agreeable person, but that gave me some work that I could do and still be home with the children. And we have a clock in my room, and it chimes every 15 minutes, which drove one of my sons just up a wall. We'd have to turn the chimes off because he stayed with me for a while. But that clock is one that our children got together and gave us for our 40th wedding anniversary. And my husband lived about 2 years after that. Well, when the tornado went through Omaha in 1975, I think it was, our house, unfortunately, was right in the path. And, of course, we lost everything. The house, clothes, furniture. There was nothing left at all. And my husband was at work. I think it was around 5 o'clock when the tornado went through. We were fine. My daughter had a scratch on her head, and that was all. Nothing. We were down in the basement.
Where was your house located?
On 72nd and Charles. And roared right down 72nd Street. And it really took everything. I mean, really everything. And my husband was at work, and I tried to get a phone, or I had a cell phone. I don't even remember how I tried to call him, or got someone to call him. And they didn't believe him. Wouldn't let him come home because they didn't believe that the tornado, it was out of range of the tornado, and they didn't know. Eventually he came home. And another time when that awful snowstorm in 75, well, being a diabetic and being at work, that's not the way you can do anything about it. And I had just gotten a call from another son, and he said, "Mom, guess what?" I said, "I know what you'll have to call, but who I called for your dad, because his wife was due, and sure enough, she went into labor, and no transportation to a hospital." Well, I said, call the rescue squad and see what you can do. And of course, there was a little girl that was about 2.5. She would not stay with the nurses, and so we did get her over to me. And so, of course, my granddaughter, she was fine with me, but he tried to they got to the hospital, not the same one she was supposed to go to. Of course, not her doctor, but there were nurses that had stayed there and couldn't get home, and I'm sure a doctor. And they were going to, she'll just stay at that closest hospital. And of course, my son came over with his little girl, and I had them, that was fine. And he kept calling the hospital to see what was going on. And they'd tell him, "No, nothing's going on, just relax." And then pretty soon he called again. The baby was born. It's a little boy. Talk about furious that he didn't get back to the hospital, and they kept telling him not to bother. And to get him at the hospital, we had 2 large trees in our front yard. One on one side of the driveway, and the other one toward the top of the hill. Our house was a steep hill. Well, it was too cold to stay out very long, but my son tied a rope around the Volkswagen, I suppose around the bumper, I don't know. And then I walked up, struggled up to a tree, and the rope was around the tree, so we could push the car and pull on the rope and get that car a little bit up the hill. Then repeat that with the second tree and get it further up the hill. And so he finally got close enough to 72nd Street that he could get on that street to try to get home, or get to her. And of course he drove up the sidewalk. You couldn't get near the street. And it was a little difficult I did help because I could take care of my granddaughter. And the son was born. And got the Volkswagen back home. Yeah, it was, he called the volunteer fire department to have them come. And they couldn't find where he was because at that time, 84th Street was bare. There were no stores or anything there. And so I explained to him how to get there. So he called the rescue squad's office, and they discussed this with the driver. And with that hookup, they finally got my daughter-in-law to the hospital. That was a long time ago. Laugh at it now, but it was not funny at the time. And there was, we were offered someplace to stay. There was nothing left of our house. So we could stay someplace. And then a cousin of mine was out of the city, and she gave us keys to her house. So we got to stay in a house. Well, first of all, we stayed in an apartment, and then we stayed in a house. And very grateful for it, because we knew that there were people that really didn't have a place to go and they didn't have any facilities of their own. But my cousin, her son was being ordained as a rabbi. And of course she was in New York or whatever because of that. And then just following that, they went on to Kansas City, and he was married. And so I had time in that house before they came home. But it was kind of a mixed up affair. At least getting my husband back home was really quite a situation. And I was driving a Volkswagen at that time. I left it in the driveway, jumped out and ran in the house. And the Volkswagen was a little bit like if you tried to squash a tin can or a pop can or something. There wasn't a lot left to it. But it was drivable. We swept all the glass out of it, and a neighbor drove me down to the insurance office, and he was going to take his little notebook and write things down. And he had his notebook, and he looked at the car, and he said, "Oh, that's total." He said, "Let me get a different paper." And so he wrote it up, and for $500 we could have had it made into some kind of a race car looking thing, whatever. No, there was no way I was going to fool around with that again. So we didn't have the car. I was still teaching. I don't think they knew too much about what was going on either. They didn't allow that for days off to straighten things up. And when they found out how bad it was, I did have a day off. One day, that was all I had, and to go back to work again. And when we had that awful ear thing. And a man that my husband worked with, apparently, they made it to our house. And I had an extra room. Actually, it was in the basement. It was a family room. It wasn't a basement room. And so I had a place for him to sleep and all that. And then for breakfast the next day. And I had made oatmeal and fixed breakfast and all. But he didn't even like the oatmeal. He didn't like anything. He did not say thank you for giving me a place to stay. As soon as somebody could come and get him, I was glad. I know why he wasn't married. There's no woman who could manage to deal with that man at all. So we've had a few spots that could have been eliminated and we'd still be fine. But anyway, we got through it, rebuilt our house.
Where?
The same thing, we just rebuilt our house. It was, I had information on the specifics of, where it was located and that sort of thing on the maps or on whatever you needed to have for reconstruction. I remembered where all the rooms were and everything, so there were some things that they could use at least to know where they were. So there was the structure that they needed to have the support boards between the rooms or something. They could redo it, and the Mennonite Disaster Service helped us a lot. Of course, I had to get the electricians, plumbers, and all of that. But the Mennonites helped rebuild the house, and they were very nice because we didn't have the money for it, and we didn't have the insurance for it. And I had told my husband about the insurance, and we were sitting in 2 chairs in the living room with the table in between and the mirror, the window behind, like everybody else. And I had read out of the Reader's Digest about increasing insurance. And I handed that book to him. I said, "You have to read this. We need to upgrade our insurance." He said, "Okay, I'll just put it there. I'll read it." Well, we didn't have a house to reconstruct. Insurance to increase. So we ended up owing about as much on our house as we had originally. But we lived through it. Thank God our family was okay. And that's what counts. I did get some more education and did some teaching. I had a classroom of deaf children, and no, we did not sign. That was supposed to be an oral classroom, and I would work with the children, and we had a speech pathologist that worked with them also. It's still very difficult to understand a child who was born deaf, how they can manage to speak. It was clear to me because I was used to it. I could understand what they were saying, but many others could not. And they made things a little difficult for the classroom and for me, because I didn't have 35 kids in my room, and they thought I was just sloughing off, I guess. So I did not go into the teacher's lounge to eat lunch or anything like that. I stayed in my room. It was unpleasant to have everybody just stop talking when you walk in a room. I loved the kids, and they were so, when you teach anybody and suddenly they go, and they've been struggling, and it's, oh, that makes everything worthwhile. They got it, and you know they did. But I've been invited to weddings of my students, and I saw one boy with his mother when I was at Westroads, and of course he's a man now. The problem with teaching the deaf and trying to have them understand is that when they are about third grade, they come to you and say that the children in the block don't want to play with them. Why not? And we will get through that. And then they said, well, how old will I be when I hear? Because their parents could hear, and they thought they would grow out of it. It was kind of hard to try to explain things to them. We did the best we could, and they would come and give me a hug, and it was well worthwhile.
Was that before cochlear implants?
They just had started the implants toward the end of when I was teaching in the classroom. I did some traveling and working with students that had a little more hearing and could remain in a regular room rather than in a self-contained classroom if they had someone to kind of help them over the humps and with the language and some of the things in their regular classroom. So that's what I did for the last 15 years I taught. And also I was assigned way out of my territory to work with another girl because they thought since I was a little more mature I could handle her parents. And that's not what you're supposed to have to do when you teach. But it was a very difficult job, and I think the parents of that particular child felt bad because part of it was their fault. She was born hearing, and then she had a disease. It struck her hearing, and she could no longer hear anything. And one of my students, a young boy, and he was a delight to teach. I told him I would take him to lunch someday if he would get 100 on his spelling test, because he didn't like to spell and he didn't worry about spelling anything correctly. And I talked with the principal, I got an okay, and we indeed did go to lunch, and he did get 100 on his spelling. I told him he had to keep it up from there on. But he wrote to me a letter, a note. I hope I still have it someplace, where he said that he thanked me for being his teacher and said I was the only person he could talk to. And we did. Sometimes they needed that more than the instruction in a book. And I could listen, and we could talk a little bit, and that helped him get along because he was a little Indian boy, and there were a lot of children. I don't know whose they all were. I think there were 17 children, though, living with his grandmother, who was not able to read or write. When I had to have something signed, I would go to their home, and they would get his brother from down the block to help sign paperwork that we needed. And it was, I'm sure it was not an easy thing for him to go through, and it was nice. He felt that he could talk to me. Had to be worth a little something to him, I'm sure. But I don't know. There isn't much more to tell. I did some traveling, working with hearing impaired students. Not as fulfilling as when I had the classroom, but they had a new teacher coming in and felt that I had a better chance of working with the several levels and in several rooms than this new teacher. So she got my classroom, and I traveled from one room to another. One room to another is right. One school didn't really have room for me, and we worked on the level where you go upstairs and then there's a platform like, and then you go up some more stairs. But we worked on that platform. That was all we had. And so I've had that. It was a fulfilling job, though. It's wonderful when a child looks up and says, "Oh, I got it," or "I know." And that's what you're there for. And I taught for about 27 years. And then I retired because my husband had gotten quite ill. And I was taking care of him more than anything else. So I retired at that point. And I had him in a nursing home. For a couple of months. When it got toward the end of the year, I retired in June, whatever the end of the year was that time, because I was going to stay home and take care of him. I wouldn't let him go anywhere again where he had bed sores and all kinds of difficult things to take care of. Well, they were supposed to take care of him, but there was one nurse on that whole floor, and there was a really sweet helper, and of course I visited him every day. And one sweet girl that came to the room when we rang up, buzzed for someone to come, and he had 2 ostomies, and I asked her, because they had dripped and it was wet. I said, "Well, that needs to be changed." And she said, "I can't do it. I'd lose my job. You have to have the nurse do it." And I said, "Well, just you tell me where the supplies are. I do all of that at home. Just get me a washcloth to clean him up and take care of it. And then you leave the room." And she did. She showed me where the supplies were, and I took care of him. Of course, I had him come home just as soon as school was out, and I retired at that point. And that was in June, and he lived until October, but at least he didn't get any more things that I could turn him and I could do whatever he needed. The only thing that the doctor was afraid I was doing too much. But the only help I had then was he insisted that I have a visiting nurse come. And she came once a week and checked his vitals, and that was all. She didn't really do anything. And then we got someone to help bathe him, because it was past the point where I could get him into a shower or anything anymore. And that did not work out. And the visiting nurse did not work out either. I showed her something of swelling, and I said, "No, I think he needs attention for this." She looked at it and said, "Oh, that's okay. I'll see it when I come back next time." Well, I took him to the hospital. I wasn't going to wait for her to come back. And indeed, that was a swelling that they had to do surgery on. And that was just a bit happened before he passed away. It was difficult. I had had a job and took care of him, and I had the house, and the children would come once in a while. It kept me very busy. However, after I didn't have the job anymore, when I retired, and I didn't have the husband to take care of anymore, it was very, very difficult. I don't think anybody should have to go through that again. A couple of years ago, my family got together to have I told them, don't make it a birthday party because I don't need anything, I don't want anything. But it was just a birthday get together. And they had invited people I really didn't think about. And they invited cousins from both sides of the family. And everybody, absolutely everybody. They invited 52 people. And that's even that's a little bit more than I have in a family. And I think it was a boardroom or something at the Blumkin home that was available. And Eileen baked 2 cakes because it didn't have to be kosher then in that particular room. Not that there would be anything non-kosher in the cakes, but so she baked one that was chocolate and one that was, I don't know, white or yellow. But she knows I like chocolate, so she had to have a chocolate cake. And then, and my brother came in from Silver Spring, Maryland, and my niece came in from Des Moines with her daughter, and I didn't expect to see that, but her daughter also played the guitar and sang for us, and I had no idea that Marilyn had that talent. And apparently she sings at weddings and wherever and makes a little money on it, but she had a delightful voice. And there just was everybody, whether it was Kansas City or Des Moines or Omaha. We had a lot of people. It was wonderful to see them all. And it was awfully nice of everybody to come. I appreciated that. And I don't know, maybe we'll do it again sometime.